withheld or destroyed or suppressed, those kinds of things. And if you are going to have an inquiry on statutory footing, I think then that does call into question, who is the most appropriate person to head up that inquiry, and will there be practical difficulties if it is not, say, a senior judge or a retired judge or somebody from a judicial background. So I think I'd just like to contribute that in relation to the head of the inquiry.
And in terms of reference, are you happy, or do you think they should be added to or subtracted from, rewritten? Are they terms of reference we can proceed with?
When we had myself and various other organisations that support or represent survivors had a meeting with the inquiry, we were told that in relation to the terms of reference, it is only the very short first paragraph that is the terms of reference, and the rest is methodology. And that is really focusing, the terms of reference at the moment seem to be focusing on, have there been institutional failures to protect children? Obviously they have. How, if the inquiry reviews that, have they been addressed? What lessons need to be learned? And that is really, it's a very...
So should it be wider?
I think it should. And there's lots and lots of points to make, but I think the most crucial one is that it's looking at how to correct the institutional failures, but it is not looking at the position of people like my clients, the people that Peter supports, the people that Hilary supports, who are the people affected by the abuse and their relatives, how to support them.
Thank you.
Looking at the institutional responses to them and their needs now.
And finally on the panel, are you happy with the panel? Do you think it should be changed? Do you think there should be additional people or fewer people?
I think this is a very vexed subject, and there has been a lot of rather heated correspondence, things on the internet about this.
What is your view?
My view really is that there should be a fresh start now. I think there's been, sadly, although it seems to me some very good people on this panel, there has been a lack of transparency about how they have been appointed. This has led to a lot of unfortunate questions being asked. Really, the terms of reference should be got right first, and then panel members appointed afresh.
Mr. Saunders, on those 3 points, very quickly, the head of the inquiry, first of all, how should the head be selected? I assume you agree with the statutory footing point.
I do indeed.
Yes. Head of inquiry?
Okay, I don't envy the Home Secretary having to make a third decision on this matter. I think she's got to look for somebody who has respect, a sort of respect of a Nelson Mandela, if you like, but somebody who has compassion, the compassion of a Mother Teresa. And I think she needs, or appoint somebody with the Rottweiler tendencies of a lawyer, such as a Michael Mansfield kind of character. Not proposing him necessarily, but he's very popular with a lot of survivor groups I know. As I say, I wouldn't want to be in the Home Secretary.
We've identified the problem. What's the solution? How would she do this?
Well, as you know, we, as in myself and a number of survivors, are meeting with Mrs May on Thursday,
right,
where in private we will have hopefully a private discussion about our views, and we're very grateful.
What names here? It's the process, Mr. Saunders.
Okay. Well, I think.
How would she do it? Should she just cast around and get people to send in suggestions?
No, because she'll get 50 different suggestions. But I think talking to survivors and survivor representatives is a good start. And of course, that's the conversation that she should have had 6 months ago before this whole mess got off the ground.
And in terms of reference, rewritten or kept the same?
I would agree with Alison that they probably need revisiting.
And the panel?
And the panel, there is, again, as Alison said, there are undoubtedly some good people on that panel that we would not have an issue with, but there are certainly people on that panel that we do have issues with, and we will be putting that to the Home Secretary on Thursday.
Do you think the panel should be recreated, or can it carry on and just be added to?
I'm in two minds about whether or not to just get on with it, knowing that we don't have confidence in the panel as it is constituted at the moment. But our suggestion at the Friday meeting when we met some of the Secretariat, which of course is provided by the Home Office, which is part of the problem, Mr Vaz, is that we've got a Secretariat from the Home Office who is going to be looking at issues that emanated from the Home Office And so there is trust
So you want
issues
an
around that.
independent secretariat?
So if there was such a thing, I would have thought an independent secretariat would have been very, very helpful, and I would have thought that, again, discussion with survivors who were at the heart of what this is all about would have been helpful before appointing a panel, some of whom, as we know, we have issues with. And as an example, I'm not going to mention any names because I don't think that's fair, but you know, if a panel member is, or panel members are there because of their political connections, because we don't see this as a political issue, this is about protecting our children, then I think that's very unfortunate. And if somebody who I'm assured is on the panel is actually a trustee of an organisation that runs care homes for children, then again, if that's true, I'd have an issue with that appointment.
Very helpful. Finally, Hilary Warner, on these 3 points, as briefly as you can, presumably you agree with the statutory footing point?
Yes.
Yes. As far as the terms of reference are concerned, do you think they ought to be rewritten?
I'm not sure that they need to be, well, I agree again in this, as what is already said. I think the concern we had on Saturday, we had a parent network day of parents from all around the country, so I was able to discuss the inquiry with them, which was really useful. And one thing that they have a concern with the whole process is that this can be so much looking at institutional failures, which is necessary.
Right, can we just stick to the terms of reference?
Well, okay.
Do you think they should be rewritten?
I think it would be good to revisit them.
And as far as the panel is concerned, are you happy with the panel, or do you think we need new
Well,
members?
I don't think I've necessarily got anything to add, but I think if the process is starting with the meeting on Thursday, that is the occasion with people meeting with representatives, certainly from...
No, we are asking, we have our own process. We won't wait until Friday. I'm asking for your views as a witness representing people. Do you think that the panel is okay, or do you think we should change the panel?
Well, I don't think there is anyone on that, for instance, representing the sort of issues of the wider family perspective, and I think that might be helpful.
So we could have additions?
We could have additions, and I would echo that there are questions...
And finally, on the head of the inquiry, how do you think the Home Secretary should select before the name comes to us? Not on the names,
no, well,
the process.
The process, I mean, I think the characteristics have already been virtually shared and agreed.
Well, so far we've got Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa...
Well, yes,
Mike
that is true,
Mansfield.
and I can see that all of us can see that that is somewhat problematic. We would all like them in our organisations. That obviously the process, someone, yes, with legal training, with warmth and understanding and some knowledge of abuse, and also crucially that they have the abilities, which may go without saying, that they are a good chair who can keep it focused, who can be sure where it's going, can draw it together and all that sort of thing. The parents did say it would be good to look for someone outside London, because they do think there's a danger always in everything being London-centric. And there are actually competent people outside the metropolis.
Indeed. Lorraine Fulbrook, then Julian Hubbard.
Thank you. I would like to ask, why can't you say here's a day specifically who on the panel you have no confidence in? I mean, the panel consists of what are considered to be experts in social care, academia, law enforcement, media, voluntary sector, and have experience in child abuse themselves. So who specifically, it will become a matter of public knowledge anyway, who specifically do you have a problem with on the panel currently? And why?
Mr. Saunders?
I represent a charity that hears from a lot of survivors, and nobody wants this to succeed more than them, can I assure you of that? Because this is about protecting our children in the future. We can't turn the clocks back. But in order to protect our children in the future, we need to uncover the truths of the past and to expose them and to bring to justice people who need to be brought to justice. Anything less than that, it will be seen as a whitewash. If we haven't got a panel in whom most survivors have trust and confidence, then it would be seen as a whitewash before it even gets off the ground. Many survivors will not engage with it if it is perceived as such. And there are people on that panel who, for a multitude of reasons, which we haven't got time to go into now, probably shouldn't be where they are now. And as I've said, because of political allegiances, because of commercial allegiances, because some of them appear to be friends with people who are in Parliament, and we think that's not appropriate. Having said that, there are certainly one or two people on that panel that I'm sure would have have the confidence of most survivors.
Chairman, if I may, but my question was, this will become a matter of public record, that this is a committee of the House. But you've stated that you have no confidence in some members of the panel.
Correct.
Who specifically do you have no confidence in, given their assumed eminence in these areas?
Well, given that
I think Ms. Full will be able to name names.
I do.
Yes, well, I don't want to name names because I think that's for the Home Secretary to hear, because it's for her to decide who is appointed, is it not? But I could be wrong, I don't know about these things. And I know that we're here because of the pressure put on by our colleagues in the media that survivors' voices are at long last being heard, because we've been writing to ministers and Parliament for a long, long time and we've got nowhere. We've never had any positive responses, certainly not for a long time. And then the media get on board because they recognise that this isn't about a bunch of old men like me and others that are whinging about the past. This is about preventing our children in the future suffering as we did and suffering as many children are doing today.
I think we have an answer. Mr. Swansea doesn't want to name anyone.
Sure.
Can we move on to Dr. Hubbard and then Nicola Blackwood? Sure, I'm coming.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, part of the role is to try to make sure there is confidence, and it is difficult if you won't say what the problems are. But the question I was actually going to ask,
With respect, Dr. Julian, I did say what the problems are: political allegiances, commercial interests, political friends. I said, but I don't name the names.
But assuming I don't know the full friend lists of everybody who's on the panel, it makes it very hard to assess. It also makes it very hard for other survivors to comment whether they agree with the assessments and so forth. But the question I was actually going to ask, because you gave a list of the characteristics you wanted for people, I think you've all done this, and talked about how amazing they have to be in all sorts of different ways. They have to be skilled in this area but not have been involved in anything which could potentially come in. They have to have all sorts of skills but not be part of the establishment and so forth. Do you think there is anybody in the country who would actually satisfy enough survivors for this to have a chance of work?
Alison Donna?
I would hope so. I mean, what I have suggested that we should perhaps be looking at is a senior judicial figure or a retired judge because of their powers, who is independent. I mean, the crucial point I think that we've learned from the previous chat is that they must be independent of the executive. You would hope you would find members of the judiciary who are independent of the executive, who perhaps, as Hilary has said, not members of the London Bar, are grown up through the regional bar. I know there have also been suggestions that perhaps we could look at figures who have practised in the Commonwealth jurisdictions. I think really it is for the Home Secretary to take on board the points that have been made about the need for independence, particularly from ministers in the Home Office or minister advising the Home Office who may have dealt with historic allegations of child abuse, and somebody there must be figures who are not on close dining terms or related to former cabinet ministers.
I take the point that it would be possible to find retired judges, for example, who weren't having on close dining terms with former cabinet ministers. I agree. But given the widespread nature of this, given how much has happened in so many different settings, I worry that it will be very hard to find even the most respected retired judges who have at no point had contact with people who have worked for places where things have happened.
But doesn't that come back to the due diligence exercise and the need for this to be gone into before their appointment? If there is a figure out there, a name recommended, then rather than the Home Secretary appointing this person, then potentially a kerfuffle arising when some conflict of interest is discovered. If the person's name is out there and people have the opportunity to say whether there are any really serious concerns about this person, links that they have, connections that they have, that may make them unsuitable, that process can be gone.
I worry that people may not know at the beginning of the inquiry because that's part of what the inquiry will find out. But you have confidence there is such a... Ms. Woolman, do you share that confidence that there is people out there who will come up with...
I think we always have to have hope in this life, even if it doesn't always get fulfilled. But I do, and I agree that sort of the judiciary thing and the perceived and actual independence is absolutely crucial. And actually, although it was a throwaway remark about looking outside London, I do hope that will be taken seriously, because then it's obvious to other people that they're not necessarily part of the Westminster bubble.
We will certainly take that seriously. David Bennett.
Mr. Saunders, Ms. Wall, my questions are directed to you. Do you think that the position over historical abuse is to some extent tied up with allegations that pretty influential people, establishment figures, if you like to use the phrase, were involved?
Yes, Mr. Winnick, there's no question of that. I was listening to Lord Tebbit on the radio not many weeks ago, and I was surprised that I ever found myself in agreement with Lord Tebbit, but he actually voiced his concerns that there almost certainly has been establishment cover-ups at the very highest levels. It didn't surprise him, and it didn't surprise him that eventually survivors were going to be speaking out. And again, I would reiterate that thanks to some people in Parliament, but particularly our friends out there in the media, they've managed to get this to a point now where at long last our government are being forced to listen to our concerns. And it is unfortunate in a way that it arises around the issues that involve high-profile people such as Cyril Smith, who we now know was a prolific abuser of children, or Jimmy Savile, who was a prolific abuser of children and of course given the keys to Broadmoor amongst other places whilst he was on his rounds. And I think unfortunately that does in some ways detract from the wider issue of abuse, which we all know mostly occurs within the household, and the vast majority of the people who contact NAPAC on a daily basis have been abused by somebody under their own roof, and it's often dad or mum or uncle or granddad. That's the sad reality, and that is not being addressed either.
Mr. Saunders, everyone would agree that the vast majority of cases are along the lines that you state in households. But what has now come to light is the statement of quite a distinguished journalist who has said, I'm referring to Don Hale, who said that Don Hale, H-A-L-E. He has said that Barbara Castle, who was the Member of Parliament where his newspaper was circulating, handed him a file of paedophiles, or alleged paedophiles, and that she said this included a number of people in pretty influential positions. He says that Special Branch officers seized the file from him, and he hasn't heard anything since. What do you say to that, bearing in mind this is a journalist of distinction who has been a journalist for many, many years, and was in fact awarded Journalist of the Year not so long ago?
Mr. Saunders, could we be brief in our answers so we can...
You've discovered I found have difficulty doing that, Mr. Vaz, but I will be brief. As we sit here speaking today, Mr. Winnick, I have no doubt that there will be dossiers and files up and down this country being destroyed or burned or lost as we speak. That's the sad reality, because as much as we here are appalled at child abuse, there are too many abusers and perpetrators out there, and some of them are in positions of great power, sadly.
Mr. Saunders, does that mean that you're saying, in effect, perhaps you're not, that the file which Geoffrey Dickens handed to the minister at the time was lost deliberately or destroyed, and it's not just an accident, but the Home Office couldn't find it?
I don't know the answer, because I wasn't there. But when a file goes missing that allegedly has names of people who are at the top of the political tree, which is what we have reason to believe was the case, then it's little wonder that they disappeared, sadly.
Thank you, Mr. Saunders. Nicola Blackwood, then Yasmin Qureshi.
Just wanted to talk a little bit about ongoing consultation with survivors. Because clearly the process up until now has not worked as effectively as it needs to. And so what I'd like to understand is what you think would be the best process to put in place to ensure that the mistakes which have been made up until now aren't made going forward. Now, I've heard some proposals such as that there's put in place an interlocutor between survivors groups and the inquiry, and then perhaps a survivors panel is put in place. Now, I wonder if you think that that would be the most appropriate process, or perhaps if another system would be more appropriate, just so that we understand what you think is best, even though obviously you're not entirely representative. I wonder if you'd like to start as well. I hadn't heard the proposal for the interlocutor before. I had heard the discussion of a survivors panel, and I think what I would say with that is that survivors of abuse obviously will have their own deeply held and deeply awful experience which they will contribute, and they will contribute as best they can. But a panel of survivors will not be, totally representative of the entire community of people. Whether there is a community, or the entire number or type or nature of people who have been abused. I think there has to be a consultation process really that involves organisations that represent large numbers of survivors of abuse, such as NAPAC and Hillary's organisation and other organisations, but also some means by which, if people want to write in, if they want to contribute, if they want to put their views across, they're entitled, they're able to do that. In Australia, where there is a Royal Commission going on at the moment, there was a period of consultation. I think it took about 3 months before the terms of reference were devised, and it was a really wide consultation, engaging a lot of people who were interested in this and enabling people to come forward with their views. And you may think, well, that sounds pretty daunting to open the doors to everyone to contribute. But I think if you are doing that at the stage where you are looking at how the inquiry is set up and goes about its business, you have much more chance then of engaging people at the stage where the inquiry is hearing direct first-hand experiences or listening to people. If the inquiry is open from the start, it stands a much better chance of engaging people down the line.
Could I just ask, was that consultation done before or after the panel was selected in Australia?
Before,
okay. Hilary, what do you think?
Yes, again, I think we had questions when I talked to the parents about opportunities for writing in written evidence, and also the possibility of meeting in groups from either the panel or the interlocutor. I can't say interlocutor. And actually, I think what also came out very strongly was the sense that we're pleased to be here today, because talking about evidence from survivors is who are the survivors. And for instance, in the small group of 30 parents we were talking with, there were 2 whose sons had committed suicide as a result of exploitation. There were 3 or 4 who are grandparents bringing up children who are fathered by one of the perpetrators, so the long-term effects of that are huge. There were 2 or 3 more who were in long-term, their children were in long-term psychiatric, often secure units, and another 2 who had ended up with either in or out of prison, or just out of prison because their lives had been so ruined. So obviously, if the survivors themselves are dead, it's really important to take evidence and to be in touch with those who've travelled so closely the journey. And while I take the point that there are all sorts of different abuse, which is one of the points of the problem of the width of the inquiry, that it is about abuse in all its forms, intrafamilial abuse, paedophile, and the particular area that we work in, which is sexual exploitation outside the family. They are all exploitation, they are all abuse, but there are different issues that arise from them. So I think the plea would be that actually the different areas are recognised to be to some extent different, but opportunity is made, particularly for those who travel the journey closely and are desperately affected by what's happening.
Mr. Saunders?
For a couple of years, NAPAC has been voicing concern about a lack of something like a Royal Commission, and I wrote to the Prime Minister some time ago suggesting a Royal Commission on the basis of Australia. Commonwealth country hadn't been granted one, and I did get a response from the Children and Families Minister to say that we weren't going to have a Royal Commission specifically about the panel and the suggestion of a survivors panel that was discussed on Friday, in fact.
Yes.
And the issue of who is to head up the panel, and I think I suggested, would it be possible to kind of have a dual chairship? Because if we were to have a judge or a retired judge, and we would all want to have a good look at the background of that judge, because a lot of people, a lot of survivors will have an issue with people who come from the judiciary, particularly if, as an example...
You're talking about someone heading up a survivors panel?
No, sorry, no.
Sorry,
I was
I'm
coming.
saying, yeah, okay.
No, I think the survivors panel is a good idea. I think survivors and many of us agree that the current panel needs to be enhanced or strengthened and revisited. But in terms of coming back to the chair, Alison mentioned about a judicial figure like a retired judge or something like that, which I think would be appropriate but would not suit many survivors who have had a very, very challenging time through the judicial system, and you can understand that.
Yeah, this was an issue that was raised in private session with a number of survivors, although again it was not representative on Thursday, where a number of survivors expressed their concerns about having a judicial figure because they had experienced difficulties going through the criminal justice system, which is fairly common. And one suggestion which was brought forward was perhaps having a non-judicial chair, but perhaps a co-chair or a deputy chair who was a retired judge or a very senior QC. And I just wonder perhaps what your response to that would be, given the opinion that you expressed earlier.
The where I was coming from with my opinion was the really the need for there to be someone who is able to certify any potential contempt of the inquiry to the appropriate court. And if that can be taken care of by having such a figure, a judge or somebody like that on the panel, but at the same time have somebody to co-chair who reaches out more in terms of their kind of characteristics and lack of background in the way that Peter has said. That judicial background may be something that is not appreciated by many survivors, and that's a good idea.
Thank you. We will come back to this. Yasmin Qureshi, finally James Thompson.
Chair, may I just make a declaration in light of the discussion that's been had this morning, and that is that last week when I was being interviewed on the BBC about Ms. Wolf, I actually said, when the presenter said to me, well, who do you think should do the job? A name I suggested, because I was asked directly, was actually Michael Mansfield as well. So I just wanted to do that as a declaration. Am I right to say, I just want to ask two questions. Am I understanding right about the existing panel, whilst you don't want to say which names should be not on it, are you saying the Home Secretary, in light of what you've said about political affiliations or financial interest, that really the Home Office and the civil servants should be doing their homework about all the people on the panel, and really by process of deduction, logical deduction, take out people who may be fitting into those categories without actually specifically mentioning names? Right?
Absolutely. And I think also to have on the panel somebody with strong investigative, if I got that right, experience as well, because there's going to be a lot of digging and delving that needs to be done. And of course in Michael Mansfield we would have such a character.
Thank you.
Just a second question just quickly about the methodology that's been adopted. As I understand, there's been some information out there as to how they will conduct the inquiry. And you mentioned about Australia's Royal Commission. Are you saying, again, if I'm understanding correctly, that really the methodology should be open in the sense that really anyone who wants to be, obviously relevant people, who want to say, make a presentation, they should be able to do so without having to even say, wait for an interlocutor or anybody acting as a go-between. So it's really wide, the methodology is very wide.
I mean, the Australian Royal Commission, as far as I can see, it operates on the basis of key principles of transparency, redress and respect for survivors, and it is very open, and there are multiple ways that you can engage with the inquiry, and indeed lots of people have. I mean, the statistics are, I think that about 17,500 people have contacted that inquiry. There have been almost 8,000 pieces of correspondence and around 1,000 private hearings. A lot of people have engaged with that inquiry, and that's in the context of the Australian population.
Thank you. Finally, James Clapperson.
Thank you very much for your evidence today, and I found it very helpful. Can I take it from what you've said that you have confidence about getting today to at least some members of the panel? And there is also the counsel to the inquiry, Ben Anderson QC, who is a very eminent human rights barrister. I think he's a UN special rapporteur. You have confidence in him.
I think Mr. Clapperson,
he's very, very eminent.
He is indeed. I don't think this situation is irretrievable.
Good.
But I think the fact that sometimes you make associations between one disaster with the people involved. So the fact that we've had two ill-judged appointments in Elizabeth Butler-Sloss and Fiona Woolf, linked to the current panel and linked to the current council, inevitably people will think, well, couldn't they have got their act together a little bit? But I take it on board completely that Ben Emerson is a highly credible and much respected member of the Barrister Council. Or bar, should I say.
And I don't know Professor Alexis Joe, I don't know so much about it, but you're confident.
She. Absolutely. Yeah, we would potentially put her forward as a possible chair.
Thank you. Well, I was very pleased with what you said about not being irretrievable, because the final point I was going to make to you is that we've had a few bumps along the way, to say the least on this, but it should still be possible to get an inquiry which commands the confidence of the public and above all of survivors, and in which there is no conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict of interest, so that we can look into all these very long established and deep-rooted problems.
I agree, and I hope that we can have a brief discussion about how we support the many survivors who are coming forward, because that is extremely important.
Indeed. Let me sum up what you're saying to this committee today, and as I've said, you're the first people we are seeing in respect of the confirmation hearings. So we have huge respect for your opinions, and we want to keep this dialogue going. After this session is over, there are going to be a lot of people writing in to say they weren't invited. That's because we can't invite everybody. But we would be very grateful if you keep us informed of any information that comes to you, into your possession, which would be helpful just to the confirmation hearing. That is what we're concerned with on this committee. And we're very grateful for the general work that you all do. It's very time consuming, and you have shown yourselves to be extremely dedicated. We're very grateful for that. What you are saying to this committee is this, that you believe that so far the process has not been satisfactory. We agree. And that if due diligence had been conducted right at the start, we probably wouldn't be sitting here today. But given that that's happened, you'd like to see an inquiry that is on a statutory footing, right from the start, not as the Home Secretary wants, if the chair of the panel decides. You want that very clear at the beginning. You want a head of the inquiry that commands the respect of the survivors groups and others, where the name can be put out into the public domain, be properly tested. By the time it comes before this committee, that person would have basically had all their antecedents out there, so people would know what we were dealing with. That although Mr. Saunders has given us characteristics of three people, two of whom are no longer with us, I'm afraid, it is possible to find someone to head this inquiry. And you've agreed with Mr. Clapperson that there are a couple of names there that you believe are very relevant and very helpful to the work that you're doing. So it is possible to find a head. You'll seem to be in agreement that we need to look again at the terms of reference, whether to start them from the scratch again or we write them, they need to change in some way. And finally, there is agreement that the panel needs to be looked at again, either a completely new panel or amendments to the panel that there are there at the moment, but you feel very strongly that there are people out there who can serve on this panel, and you believe that there are some people on this panel who are pretty good people and would do a good job, but there are others who you won't name today, Mr. Saunders, who you consider not to be up to scratch. Have I got it right so far?
Are we going to mention support for survivors, Mr. Banks?
I was just coming to that. That's why I paused. It is extremely important that throughout this process, proper support is given to survivors groups, whether it is through the interlocutor that Nicola Blackwood spoke of, whether it is other sources of support. We were concerned that a number of people came to our meeting on Thursday who did not have, for example, travelling expenses to come and meet this committee. If you are going to take evidence and you're going to consult people, they need to be able to leave their jobs and come and see the people responsible. And there needs to be an open and transparent dialogue with you and others. Is that what you're telling this committee, in summary?
The people who give evidence in this inquiry need to be supported, and it's not just a question of travel expenses, although that is very important, because we had distressed calls from people who came last week, who were down literally to their last few pounds in their bank account.
Sure.
But it's not just about that, it's supported psychologically, because reliving the trauma and telling the trauma is very psychologically difficult for many people, and they need to feel safe.
Yes.
Because you're talking about criminal activity,
Of
and
course.
some of those perpetrators may be at large, and they need to feel that this is a safe process that they can engage in.
Absolutely. One final question, please, if I may, and a very, very brief answer from everybody. Bearing in mind what you told the committee this morning, do you think there should be a pause in what the panel is doing until these matters are resolved? Or are you happy for the panel to continue with its work and the changes to take place in parallel? A very brief answer, please, because we have another witness in the House is sitting on Home Office matters at 1 o'clock.
I think these matters are too important to carry on without a pause.
Mr. Saunders?
A brief pause, but we need a lot of support and ongoing support for survivors. We need the outcome to be our children are better protected and proper systems of support in place for survivors for the long term. NAPAC cannot do it on its own. We're a small organisation.
Yes.
Our rent, Mr. Vaz, has just been put up 50% by our kind, big society-loving landlords, so we've got to move premises. We don't know where we're going to go.
Sure.
Survivors need long-term support.
We get the point. Ms. Mulder, pause or carry on?
I think a pause, but I agree a short pause. And can I just say, one of the greatest forms of support, as well as therapeutic support, is the belief that actually things will change. Because we are hearing stories today of the response that people get when they first come into this horrific situation, where families are judged. And actually, if we cannot lose sight in going and looking at all the institutional failures, which we need to, that actually we don't lose sight of who is actually doing the raping, who is doing it, and concentrate on better ways
Thank
of
you very much. I can assure you the committee will be in touch with you again. We will be writing to you, and if there's anything further you need from us, please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Order, order. Could we call Peter Wanless to the dais, please?